right, everybody, welcome to another Perceptive podcast here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am, of course, Josh Blazer, and we have another developer interview lined up this week. My guest tonight is currently doing the Kickstarter for the game Wastenauts, which is a deck building roguelike with kind of the major hook being that it is multiplayer focused as well. So please welcome from Raspberry Games, Dean Razavi. How are you doing, Dean?
Hi, I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me on. I know you were able to dig into the game a little bit and play it as well. And yeah, I'm excited to chat about it more.
Yep. And again, thank you so much for reaching out and wanting me to check out your game. We were just chatting about this before we started. It's always great. As I'm sure you're no doubt aware, it's always hard to find like people wanting to cover like smaller and games that haven't blown up yet. So I'm really
Yeah,
glad you reached out to me.
it's also, there's so many. First off, there's so many games out there, and then there's so
Mm-hmm.
many good games that are out there. And so it's tough to a little bit to get somebody interested in a game that isn't out yet, and it has a while to come out yet, and things like that as well. So
Mm-hmm.
thanks so much for picking it up.
Not a problem. Nexus Games, who's in chat, that's my co-host for a lot of stuff, Sharky. He was the one who I played the game with on that footage that I sent over.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for playing it, Nexus. Yeah, it's we say that it can be played 1 to 4 players. We do want to be able to focus on single player vibes as well, but personally, it's the most fun multiplayer. So I'm glad you got to experience that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure we're on. I'm sure he may not be feeling too. I know you may have a bit of a cold or something, but if he is available, I'm sure he's going to be sending lots of design questions
Okay,
your
excellent.
way here.
Excellent.
Let me just
I'm
get
ready
the
for it.
camera nice and organized. There we
Oh,
go.
sorry.
No, this
I have
is
a tendency to
me
move
like
around.
OBS.
Yeah.
All right, that should be good.
All
So,
right.
to get things started with, Dean, since this is your first time on the cast, could you talk a little bit about your background and what is Wastenauts?
Yeah. So background is weird, but the more that I'm in games, the more I find that everyone's background is a little weird.
True.
Uh, I used to be an attorney. I was a general commercial litigator for about 6 years, and during that time was doing a lot of games as a hobby, game design stuff, and got involved in game development scenes around here in New York. Um, and I there was a period where I was about to launch my first game, Vidar, and kind of felt like to be able to do it successfully, I needed to focus on it full time,
Mm-hmm.
and started to treat it more and more as a commercial endeavor. And so as I did that, I decided to kind of pull the trigger and go into game dev full time. So I've been doing that. That was around 2016. So I've been doing Raspberry Games now for, gosh, almost 5 years, which is kind of scary. Like it's almost as much time as I was an attorney, which is a little wild. I Yeah, so this is really in addition to kind of doing my own studio and working on my own games, I freelance as a producer for other indie game studios. And so I have the opportunity to work on seeing games out the door in other studios, and less it from a design perspective there, although producers get their hands in everything. um and this is Wastenauts is my second commercial release, so uh, or will be when it actually comes out. So the quick story about Wastenauts is it is a cooperative collectible card crawler. So the whole idea is that you are kind of playing a little bit like Slay the Spire, where you've got some cards and you're fighting monsters and stuff like that, but it's more permanent progression, like RPG style collectible. You're unlocking cards of your account and you take it with you from session to session. Um, that's kind of the vibe. Yeah. It's all online multiplayer. It's for 1 to 4 players. It's set in the kind of a wasteland setting, post-apocalypse. Very tongue-in-cheek. We tend to not try to take it too seriously, the game. We want it to be kind of silly and Borderlandsy a little bit. And it's in Kickstarter right now. So it's running until April 22nd. Yeah. Also, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces in chat. So hi Blair, hi Welshie, hi Softwhite. um, these are good. These are all good people.
All right, and like you said, like everyone has their own path when it comes to game dev. That's like I think like part of the course when it comes to
Yes,
being an indie developer.
yes. I've heard a lot of different stories, a lot of different paths, and one of the really cool things specifically about being a game developer here in New York is that that's even more common than most places. When I would first start showing up to events, and I would be coming from the office. So like I was the only one who was still there in like a suit and tie at a games con, but but there were definitely other people who are like, oh, I do finance, I do marketing, I do all this kind of stuff. So everyone kind of came from other places. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, with Wastenauts, as we said at the start, this is on Kickstarter, and at the time of this recording, and hopefully by the time this goes up for those of you watching this, then the Kickstarter will still be going on. How long have you been working on Wastenauts for?
Gosh, I want to say close to 3 years. It's there's been times where we're like all in. There's times where we take a step back, and but I think in earnest, because our first showing I think was at DreamHack in 2018. The game looked absolutely nothing like it does right now,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was quite a while ago. So about 3 years. We you know the core
Mm-hmm.
team right now. I'm the only one who's pretty much full time on it, and the team kind of has more time or less time depending on what's going on with everyone else's stuff. And even I've last year had other projects in the works, so that's kind of how we approach it. And it's also gone through a lot of iteration to get here. We had a pretty solidly different game over the past 3 years, especially from an artistic standpoint, especially from the core mechanics and what systems exactly need to belong in this. Um, and so those kinds of things, it made more sense for us to just continue to spend time like making sure it's fun until we finally got like around last year. Suddenly it was like, oh, people are having fun with the game. Okay, now we can like start to continue to work on building it out and getting an alpha ready and all that. But until you reach that point where it's like, is this fun? Okay, then who knows how long that process is until it gets to a fun state.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and especially for a game like this, you say you started this about 3 years ago, so that would have been like 2018. And I
Yeah.
think like the whole kind of like deck building roguelike, set building design kind of thing, I think took off right around that time. Slay the Spire was 2019.
Right.
So I guess what inspired you to make Waste and Naughts like as a deck builder, and did it start originally as a deck builder?
Yeah, it always kind of did. There were some other RPG style games, and actually the game came from my partner Dan. He had a tabletop RPG that he was running that he had built this kind of universe for.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to look at different formats where it could really excel. And a really easy way to test kind of a randomized dungeon is to have them written, like all the different things that you could encounter, write them on index cards, and then shuffle them up, and then draw them, and it's kind of like you're encountering things in a dungeon, right? It's essentially what we've done is randomize the dungeon, and that's how the game existed for a while. It was just an index cards that I think I still have in a linen closet somewhere. Um, and so the that's kind of where we had really started with that idea. Originally, at the time when we were telling people about it, because we didn't have a Slay the Spire reference, we had the like Munchkin, for which a lot of other people were familiar with. It wasn't as popular, but Munchkin is a game where it's competitive, but you do have this idea of the deck as a dungeon, where you're flipping over cards and you're resolving those cards as you find them. So you're fighting monsters, you're taking loot, and that's the same thing with us. So we were using the comparison of Munchkin, but cooperative, all working together to try to get through the deck, as opposed to a competitive backstabby kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we had some references, and then once rogue like deck builders became popular, once Slay the Spire entered the arena, once Monster Train entered the arena, and a few others, we were like, okay, there's another comparison point here for us. We had also used playing Hearthstone with your friends instead of against them, since it is a collectible card game. But that one, I think, managed to confuse people more than more than actually do any work. So yeah.
And I guess with the kind of design of Wastenauts, like for people watching this who haven't had a chance to play the game, for those of you who are watching, the demo, you do have a demo available for everyone to play right now, right?
Yep. You can go to the Steam page, and there's a new feature that Steam has just added, which is like a play test. And you can just hit request access right there, and it'll allow you to get into the demo for this period during the Kickstarter. Yeah.
Nice.
Or you can just ping us in Discord and we'll get you a key. Like, it's not.
So, with kind of the design of Wastenauts itself, like, is the game meant to be played like primarily multiplayer? Like, what's kind of the focus? Is it the multiplayer side or the single player?
Yeah, we wanted the focus is definitely a fun game.
Mhm.
That more than anything, whether it was single player or multiplayer, we pull a lot of inspiration from party-based dungeon crawlers. So yeah, we look at certain things like what is the single player versus multiplayer experience in a Diablo or Path of Exile. We also look at things like Darkest Dungeon and games where you're having like a group that is supporting each other that focuses on exploring different encounters, and that's really where we want the experience to be fun, primarily, first and foremost, whether that's just you controlling all the characters like in a lot of dungeon crawlers, or whether we're splitting up and everyone is responsible for different people like in some other dungeon crawlers.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the actual multiplayer versus single player dichotomy, we wanted to make sure that people are finding new cool things by playing with other people. So in the game, if I'm controlling all four players, or all four characters, sorry, then I am coming in with my library of cards for each of them. They're at the level that I've gotten them, all the cards and skills that I've unlocked for them,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of have an understanding of that. But if I play with you, you may have cards for the scout character that I've never seen before, and that can give me some kind of insight as to like, oh, there's all these other kinds of things, there's these cool new strategies, there's these other builds that I can have. And that's where we really like to focus that effort on is my Andrea is the name of our scout character. My Andrea may be different than your Andrea, and that can create a cool kind of vibe when playing with multiplayer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was kind of interesting about Wastenauts, as you said, with like each character, they have very specific roles for the group. Um, the singer, the green hair lady, she gets benefits when she's with more people in their party.
Yeah.
While Buster, who's the sniper, like one thing that I thought was like very cute was that his Overwatch ability lets him basically be his own party, but then he can join another group that gets attacked first. And there's definitely a lot of like synergies and dynamics around kind of not only how you order your party around or order who goes out, but what cards you choose as well. Because the scout, as I'm sure you're aware of, can swap out cards or sees the next three cards and then moves them around. Where did I guess like those dynamics come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we that has gone through a lot of iteration. We really rely on an iterative process to understand this game generally, and so last year, I want to say it was around this time last year actually, we sat down and we said, cool, we have all these cool concepts in the game, we have all these cards now, here's how they're playing out and all these characters, let's refine them and make sure we have an understanding of what each playstyle is supposed to be for each of these characters. So, the way that you put it for Buster was this idea of that he's not supposed to be in people's parties because he gets penalties, but then he can Overwatch to join other ones without those penalties. And so we looked at Buster really through a lens of this is gonna sound weird, but like an AFK player, a player who is playing this game but also watching TV, or a player who's playing this game at something else or something like that. And said, okay, what does that look like for a character who is, in terms of flavor, supposed to be a sniper, so they're staying away from the action and joining, and what does that look like for a character who wants to kind of just set it up and let their character run on their own. And so we saw, there's some really great cards that he has that are all like preparatory kind of cards, and then there's some that don't make any sense in these in this kit, where he's doing like too many things in combat or having to pay too much attention to it. Let's get rid of those. Let's focus him all in on this kind of prepare your stuff at camp. And that's that process of refining these characters so that they felt like they had different play styles that matched what the character and lore was supposed to be, was a huge effort on our part last year to essentially take every single card, put it in a big Google document, and be like, which ones of these fit, which ones of these don't fit. For the other side of that, to get more kind of inspiration and stuff, we look at again, to come back to this idea of like a party-based dungeon crawler, we try to understand what is that role in our game. So our fifth character that's unlockable in the demo is Delilah. And Delilah wears a pig face. She barely says anything. She wields a big hammer, and we knew right off the bat that we wanted her to be a tank. But we didn't kind of know, like, what is a tank in this game? Like, so here's what tanks do in a dungeon crawler, right? They hold aggro, they can soak a lot of damage, they can, what does aggro mean in our game? What does those kinds of concepts in our game do? And then pull through that line to say, okay, she's not going to be able to do as much damage. She's going to be, somebody who can, in fact, draw attention to herself and stuff like that. So we do rely on a lot of those other kinds of games. It's interesting, even though mechanically speaking, like at the top, we look at Slay the Spire and Monster Train and other deck builders and roguelikes, when we're actually looking at the meat and potatoes of the cards, we go much more to like dungeon crawlers than we do to other card games.
And are there any other characters kind of like planned for the game? Right now, of course, the 4 in the game, you have a planned 5th. Any other ones you're thinking of?
Yeah, so we have the 5th one is currently is in the game. She's even in the demo you can right now it just like costs money to unlock her, but she's we'll eventually clean that up. We're planning on 3 more for launch, for a total of 8. We see them as roughly, like, the next set of 4 is roughly replacing one of the core 4, but it's not so one-to-one. We're not looking at like, oh, this is a scout, this is a scout, this is a brawler, this is a brawler. We want to make sure that any kind of party composition makes sense, and we've got a 3rd level that's coming up, probably going to be released in like a week or 2, probably during the Kickstarter, that I'm already finding, like, I don't want to, like, the scout is kind of useless here. Like, I don't want to use her as much. Not useless, but I don't want to use her nearly as much as I want to use, like, some of the other characters. Yeah.
Now, going back to what you just said about kind of being inspired by dungeon crawlers and more of that kind of design, one thing that was very interesting, that was something you could speak a little bit more about, is creating, like, the adventure deck. Because in the game, of course, when we played, you have, like, the story mode, or the story version of each level, and then you can go back into the level to get more loot. And, like, for people watching us or listening right now, what separates kind of adventure mode from the story gameplay?
Yeah. So the whole idea with adventure mode, after you play a level, and we give you the story of that level, and that we have more dialogue in it. We have event cards at specific places that tell the story of that zone. You can go back and you can farm that zone in our adventure mode. In that mode, you actually add your own monsters from your own library into the deck. And when you do that, you increase the difficulty. You can set the difficulty entirely based by the monsters that you're adding. when you increase the difficulty, you increase the rewards and the different drops that are going to come in adventure mode. And so it's a way to kind of continually escalate each and every level. Some of the cool things about that mode are we do random event cards. So there's a pool of event cards that can show up in that deck, and we choose some that go in. So that way it's not just the same each time. And we also have a different system of resources that you can use called salvage. So in story mode, you're getting scrap. It's like easy to use to craft and that kind of stuff. With the salvage, you can choose to use it to craft gear that'll help you through the session, or you can take it back to the airship. That's kind of the hub, the title screen, the main screen where you're doing all your loadouts and stuff like that. And you can use that to upgrade your whole kind of meta progression more permanently. So it's kind of almost like taking resources back, and Loop Hero is like an easy recent example or something, where you're building up your actual town. I'm a sucker for that in every single game. If I can build up a town, if I can have that kind of like comeback, it's my favorite.
Oh yeah, like one of my favorite games was Hinterland from like 2007, 2008. It was like an ARPG where you also build a city. And the whole die is you go out, you kill enemies, you bring back materials and gear, you can upgrade your town, you give it to your farmer, they do better farming, you then go back out.
It's my favorite loop. It's really my favorite loop. So that's one of the cool things about it. And then the kind of the way that we expect you to progress is mostly by card drops that happen in adventure mode. And you get 3 at the conclusion of each session. Each session's only about like 20 minutes or so. You get those 3 cards, and you can sell them if you need to, like sell dupes and stuff like that. But the higher the difficulty, the more rare drops you're going to get. And our plan is, especially once we have like the full level cap and everything in, for each zone to have specific rare cards that you have to go and hunt there. So if you're like, oh, I'm looking for this particular like ability card, I gotta go to the dunes, and I have to crank up the level as high as I can possibly take it, so that I can try to have a chance for those cards to show up as that end game grind. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like very interesting about like Wastenauts compared to some of the other deck builders that we've had a chance to play. It feels more, I don't want to say like MMO-ish, but it feels more focused on like that kind of persistent model. Like as you said, you go out, you fight, you level your character up, which then lets you get more cards. And I guess like a few minutes ago, you said that the original version of Wastenauts was like a far different beast compared to what it is right now. Like, what was like kind of like your original vision, and like when did you decide to kind of change it to where it's at now?
Yeah, some of the core session mechanics are still around, although I have notes from our playtest where from like the first time that we decided to add the concept of parties into the game, we're like, oh, this could be really cool. It was so kind of fluid. But the original idea was that it was just going to be individual missions that you would go through, and so you would finish this mission, and you would the first one in the waste, you would move to the next one in the dunes, you would move to the next one and that one, and that was it. And so it was like, okay, we would then, after you finish those missions, we'll sell you some more. And there was no real retention there. It was just kind of a go from one to the next. There wasn't so much of a focus on collectible either, like a collectible card model. It was more just a here are the handful of cards, and you can use them or not. And as we constantly came up with cooler and cooler ideas for cards, we were like, okay, there has to be a limit for this, and there has to be a way to kind of harness this. And at the same time, we originally intended for this to be a tabletop game. Like we were just thinking card game. This is something that we'll sell, as a physical item. And as we continue to talk about it more and more, my experience was with video games. Dan's experience was with video games. Marina, our artist, her experience was with video games. And we're like, we don't know the first thing about shipping. We don't know the first thing about manufacturing. Why are we doing this? So went the video game route, and that's when we really realized we needed to have more retention models. It's interesting that you mentioned MMOs, because my first go-to for that concept of going out and trying to hunt for rare ability cards like that, I stole that idea from Guild Wars 1.
Mhm.
which is an MMO where the end game was very much about going out, finding harder monsters, and stealing their skills that you would be able to use in the future. And a lot of our other design principles, we try to focus on everything as a card. So unlike some of these other
Mhm.
deck builders, our monster cards are cards. Our monsters are cards. They're not just some monster that you encounter. They're everything in the game is as much as we can as a card. Even the characters are technically cards. And that was pulled from Path of Exile of everything is a item that's that can be modified. And so we do look to those things that have a longer retention loop to understand how we can better improve the systems within the game. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and it is very interesting about like combining these aspects into a game like this, and with kind of like, I guess like, again, like we're recording this, you're in the middle of Kickstarter or you just started, so we can't exactly talk too much about like high end or late game, but like I'm sure you've thought about this. Like, what does like late game or like master level play of Wastenauts looks like in terms of I guess like cards or just like the general gameplay loop of it?
Yeah. So there's a few different loops that we like that interact with each other, and it's definitely something we talk about pretty frequently for what does the end game look like. Although I will say that, of course, anything that I'm saying right now, all of this could be blown out of the water and completely changed by the time the game actually launches. Since like I said, kind of at the beginning, we try it, and if it's not fun, we're like, all right, try something else. Um, but right now, our thinking is there's a handful of ways for that late game kind of play, and it is RPG style progression. So while we want to kind of keep you at a cap of level for each character, we can certainly increase the difficulty using adventure mode in theory infinitely. We can continue
Mm-hmm.
to add new monster cards and increase the difficulty there. And so higher and higher level play would be, okay, my character's level 20, but I'm taking on level 30, level 40 zones as I continue to increase my my power through the cards that I have unlocked and things like that. The goal there is essentially again to continue to increase that chance that you're going to get ultra rare cards, and we can continue to add cards within the deck to um,
Mm-hmm.
as drops for you there. Additionally, there's a sorry, go ahead.
I was just about to ask about kind of like what rare cards look like, but finish your thought first, and then we'll like
I
talk
was
about
just gonna
that.
say, we also have a upgrade system for each card.
Okay.
So we have the church with the clergy play a large part in our lore, and they have the ability to upgrade all of your abilities, all of your gear blueprints. It's expensive, and it also requires killing mini bosses and getting resources from them specifically to use. So it's another path through. And then the third that we haven't really talked about with anyone, but it's something that we've been developing internally for a while, is quests and specifically adding quests that cover multiple sessions that as a result add specific cards in the deck, and you need to go from one place to another in order to do that. Those kinds of things with specific rewards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was kind of like asking, like kind of like as the segue from that, like every game that has kind of like rarity for cards definitely operates on different rules for how that
Yeah.
rarity works. Is it just a normal card but better? Is it a unique card with different properties? What's kind of the philosophy for Wastenauts in terms of like how rarity kind of defines a card?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We look at cards that are core to a character's identity should be common or uncommon in that bucket. And really the distinction there is only complexity. We
Mm-hmm.
feel like maybe hold back some of the more like complex cards as uncommon just so that players aren't overwhelmed. And that's pretty much it. When it gets to the rarity of card drops, we start looking at, okay, this is for a very specific play style for this character. So we talked about our sniper Buster as like an AFK character. He's got a lot of different play styles. He has some ammo stances that he can use. He has things that will, allow him to help with other parties remotely. One of the rare cards for him is actually just a buff for everyone, for every single character, but he has to stay at camp. And it's very specifically geared towards a play style of Buster is like checking out and helping from camp, as opposed to using like some of these other tools. So that's what we look at in terms of, is this core to their identity, or is this one particular play style, to determine the rarity of things? Yeah.
And it is like very interesting as you're describing a lot like how these synergies work, because as I'm sure if Shark is still watching, like we really didn't see a game really like hit like these like very specific notes in terms of its gameplay, like with the adventure deck, sign with cards, the monsters, etc. And I guess the next question then is, what is kind of the philosophy for like the monster card designs? Because obviously with the adventure mode, you're able to kind of just like pick and choose exactly how you want. What's kind of like how you're building the various monsters in terms of, how hard are they, what kind of powers they should get compared to the player, etc., etc.
Yeah, we start with coolness. We honestly just like, the first thing is like, this sounds like a cool idea. And let's stick it on a monster and let's see how easy or difficult it is. We tend, we're still in that phase where we're generating all of the monster cards. We're still, because we're in Kickstarter, we're like, here's a core set we could get off the ground, but we're going to need a lot more. So you'll notice that there's mechanics that show up on one or two monsters that, could be applied across the board. And that's just us testing, like, is this fun? Is this a cool thing? Does it feel like when you draw that card, are you like, oh, like now I get how this monster's supposed to be? And if you get that oh moment, cool. We'll add it to a bunch of other things. In terms of balance and things like that, to be fair, we haven't done much of a balance pass. We do have a general spreadsheet where we're like, here's roughly what stats we expect you to have at each level. And so actually, Dan built a simulator, a battle simulator, where we can put like Lucky Jack at a given level against a monster with specific HP and EP, and it'll tell us roughly how many injuries he'll take during that, and he'll run it like 100 times. And so we could say, okay, this is maybe a little bit too much HP or too much speed or things like that. That gives us a good starting point. After that, it's just kind of looking at, as we play it, is it too hard or too easy? We're finding right now generally that we've like we're in alpha and we've already had power creep. So we and rather than nerfing our characters, we like that feeling of being a boss. We like that feeling of finding these like ridiculous combos to exploit. One of the early decisions that we made was not to really modify dice values, to not have a ton of things that are changing, the numbers on your dice, and instead we wanted to just like shotgun 100 dice to the boss's face. It just felt better, right? We wanted you to feel cooler in that sense.
Unless all those dice roll 0, then it's just, oh my god.
Then you're cursed. Then like the game hates you.
Shark, you heard that, right? The game hates me.
Yes. So that's where we take a look at how we're going to do those monsters. And then anytime we have an idea for a monster, we're like, okay, what's the counterplay? Sometimes is there specific gear that we want you to be able to craft that can counter this or things like that.
And speaking about the dice, I'm glad you brought that up, because one question that Shark had when we were playing and we weren't sure about, will there be anything in terms of dice manipulation, specifically in the way of being able to like customize dice? I know you have the personalized like the dice skins, but anything in terms of saying, I will buy, the masochistic dice, and let's say it only has like one side of it, but let's say it could roll like a 5 or a 6, or I want the easier dice, so let's say it has all sides open but just one on each one, something along those lines.
So we originally played with an idea that we called power dice, which were like there was like a card that you could play that was like, for this round only, you get like better dice.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up maybe complicating things a little bit more than it needed to. That being said, it's a really great, I mean, the nice thing about these kinds of games is the design space is nearly infinite. And so we can always like go in and add something, in the future. And because we're going to be adding these 3 additional characters, it may be something that we explore, say, oh, this character has different dice. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from releasing Delilah in a way that she is only playable after you've played the game for a while. She doesn't have an attack card. She just doesn't. And so that would, I think, throw off new players, be like, wait, I just learned all this stuff about, which cards are what, and now she's completely different. But now that you've experienced it and you're like, oh, she doesn't have an attack card. Okay, now I got to learn something new. That could be a cool place to introduce the next character, be like, oh, their dice are different or something like that. Yeah.
It's not, as you said, like that's one of like the benefits of these kinds of games, is that because each system is kind of like modular along those lines, it really opens up the doors to expand things with a new character, a new faction, a new weapon. Again, like I just played the Monster Train DLC that came out the other day, and that just once again just like throws you completely for a loop when you get a new faction. You have no idea what any of it does.
Right, exactly. It's the it's the expansion in Hearthstone that's going to come with like a dozen new keywords, and you're like, okay, I gotta learn what all these do now, right?
Yes.
Or even like Magic the Gathering or something, and that can sometimes feel overwhelming, and because one of our core philosophies is that like you shouldn't have to constantly keep up with the new stuff that's coming out, or have the latest and greatest, and so we can pace that out over time as the player is experiencing the game, introducing more and more of these keywords as they play. So it's almost like everyone gets to be a beginner, unlike some of these other games where you're jumping in and it's like, nope, it's time for you to learn everything. Like, learn the past 5 expansions. Let's go. Yeah.
And I guess like getting back to kind of like the adventure mode and the monster cards for a second. I want to ask in terms of boss fights, because the bosses in this excuse me, the bosses are a bit different compared to some other games we played. Primarily by the fact that they seem to be locked to each specific region, and there's that kind of meta strategy that you can build a specific gear or specific equipment that, if you're good enough, that can like nullify or cancel one of the boss's actions. And I was just hoping you could like talk a little bit more, expand on that for people watching.
Yeah. We early in the prototyping, like even when on index cards, we had an idea of some kind of like zone mechanic, some kind of secondary objective that you had to meet while you were playing. And so the easiest one for us when we were testing it was, okay, pay 100 scrap and you like the boss can't heal, and that'll be kind of it. And so that made it into the first boss as a pretty straightforward way to do it. Our second boss is a little bit more abstract in that regard. Our second boss has a ability that it gains more health when you draw it for every card that is still left in the deck. And so the goal is really to be in as like drawing as many cards as you can, and to push the emphasis onto how can we make it so that we're focusing on drawing a lot of these cards on the deck. There's some cards that'll let you draw double. There's some cards. So now let's try to focus on those. And our third boss, I'm not going to spoil too much, but our third boss actually, I've done this one on stream, so it's okay. We're introducing a new keyword called disrupt, which forces a monster down to its next action or to skip its like what else it was going to do. Has some really easy things to deal with and some really hard things to deal with, and so making sure to disrupt it at the exact right time is the focus there. And getting those items throughout the session. We want to make sure that each boss feels unique and feels like a cool moment, and something to consider both at the time that you're doing loadout, like when you're choosing what abilities you're going to have, what characters you're taking, and throughout the session to think, okay, do I really want to craft this, or is this better? How can I better achieve the goal to be prepared for the boss?
And speaking about like things you can craft during the session, you of course have the various like gear cards that each character can spend resources on, those cards can really change how that character plays during that specific session. What was kind of like the balancing or like thought process behind that?
Yeah. We so originally we had maybe one or two of these things, and it was just a situation of like everyone try to craft your one gear before the end of the session, and it just felt like a oh, we did get it or we didn't get it, and that was it. And so we started to introduce more gear cards, some of which are just good always, but a lot of them that are situational, a lot of them that are really good at the beginning of the session if you can get them out, but
Mm-hmm.
are probably useless for the boss. And a lot that are really good for the boss if you need to, like, ramp up right before then. A lot that are good at countering one or two specific mechanics if you're finding a lot of that, and otherwise kind of useless. And that allowed us the opportunity to use. We've always talked about the game is split between kind of a day phase and a night phase, and we've
Mm-hmm.
always talked about that night phase at camp as returning to town in a dungeon crawler, where you, like, sell your items, you, like, get your quest, all that kind of stuff, and that plateau of pacing of like, okay, before I go back out there. And part of that strategic decision making there was to say, okay, what do we need? What's the goal here? What are we trying to do? We're back at camp. What are we trying to do here? And crafting is a really big part of that for us. Okay, we're finding that um, you know Lena really can't be going out on her own right now. It's like she's too weak by herself. We really need her to be partying up with somebody, but at the same time we really need to be drawing more cards. So let's go ahead and craft the she has a card that's, I think, the equalizer, maybe. I think that's what it's called, which is she get the party that she's in gets the draws of the fastest person instead of the lowest. So we can, resolve that situation so that we can still get our cards, but make sure that Lena's in a party with somebody. Um, and that's our hope. That's our hope with the gear, is that it fills a need as opposed to just a straight, like, I got better, I'm stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah,
We
and
actually,
oh no, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, we use that especially with as we're sitting down and designing new cards, where we asked generally like three questions. Can we make a card that makes this person better at what they already do? Can we make a card that fills a gap that this person doesn't have? And can we make a card that is just kind of weird and changes the flavor of the character a little bit? Those are the three lenses that we tend to look towards when we're like, okay, time to put out some new cards.
Great. And
Yeah.
as a reminder, for people watching us live right now, if you do have any questions for Dean regarding Wastenauts, feel free to put them in the comments and we will get to them as they show up. Let's see. Yeah.
And you
And
see, it's Powered Ice Knights. So her with the sniper backing her up. So she got all of her cards, but I also checked what cards were coming up. Yeah, and that's kind of the goal here, is that each character is supplementing the other characters in interesting ways. Um, there's some really cool combos out there. Most of them our players have found. Some of them are definitely broken, but like we're gonna keep them anyway. Yeah.
yeah, and I guess like in terms of like play testing and kind of like feedback from people, what has been, I guess, like we were having this discussion about kind of like how grindy or how much you need to play the game in order to really start to see a lot of the stuff. What's been like kind of the discussions along those lines? Because as we said, a
Yeah.
lot of the like core gameplay loop of Wastenauts is that the dungeon crawler, go in, do a quest, do an adventure, bring back the loot, power up, go back in, and as you all know, repeat until you're overpowered.
Yes. Yeah, we generally, in terms of leveling, we've had some good discussions in terms, like, how many sessions do we expect you to play before you've made it to the next level? What we haven't really done, in part because the entire salvage system was added like a month ago, was really like balance that out. Okay, how many do we need to get to each level for the store and for upgrading the store, upgrading the church, and those moments? How many cards do we want to drop? What should the costs be in terms of those things? Those are decisions that are still coming. We have a general sense as to what we want, but we haven't really put that to practice and like done all the number crunching for it yet. Mostly because we're still in development, and my feeling is like balance tends to come later. My general philosophy for balance is like, how do we keep the like, is basically keep one thing that feels really good and then fine tune everything else around it. Because if you don't, if everything can be changed and fine tuned, then nothing will ever stick. As a result, yeah.
And
The name game. So this game has gone through several names. There was one that was just an internal working name for a while. It was just Scrapyard. That was meaningless and too generic. But for a very long time, this game was actually called From Rust, up until about a month ago. And we ultimately, so about one time per every convention that we were at, we would get somebody who would ask, "Oh, is this game related to Rust, the survival game?" I'd be like, "No, it has absolutely nothing to do with it." And then we also were, it was just basically impossible to Google. And so ultimately, we're between those two things. We're like, we got to change it. We knew that we had to change it. We have known that we had to change it for at least a year. And at the same time, changing the name of a game after you've already built a community is very difficult. I reached out to some friends, a friend at Serenity Forge who had just gone through the same thing and was like, "How do I do this?" And he's like, "You either don't do it or you do it immediately, like you do it yesterday." And I took neither of those, and we waited a year. And we spent a long time, a lot of brainstorming for a lot of different kinds of names, and reaching out to a lot of friends and saying, "Okay, off of these five, like these five, okay, these five, what about these five?" And constantly giving them new names. Which ones do you like better? And Wastenauts continued to be just the favorite for it. And it was difficult to get away from the pun. It was difficult to get away from the fact that it wasn't, super related to anything. It was easily Googleable. We're like, all right, fine, that's it. And then it took us another like 3 months to get the logo and everything set up. So took some time before we announced it. But that was the decision. We did a fair amount of testing with friends and family to understand what the best way to do it is. It's nice because one of our core narrative themes for the game is making do with what you've got. We want to like highlight that as a theme throughout the game, and so Waste Not Want Not is already kind of in that vein of making do with what you've got. So we get that additional layer of narrative emphasis as well.
Yeah, and coming up with a catchy name, that is a nightmare in of itself, as I'm sure Shark's well aware of, I'm well aware of, and just about every developer who's trying to come up with something for their title is aware of.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. You want to get something evocative. You want to get something that's not generic. You want to get something that understands the perspective of the game, that conveys the tone, and then at the same time something easily, searchable and easily pronounceable. Yep.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else design related. Anything else regarding? I do want to ask a few questions about like the UI and the art, and we'll do that next. But anything else gameplay or game development related that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the different like play styles and different roles and stuff. We actually, we went, and this may end up showing up in the game because we've gone back and forth on it so many times. Is there such a thing as a class in this game? And from a design perspective, we can disentangle the difference between classes and roles, and we can say, there are people who fit this particular class, but then each of these classes do these individual roles. Do we have those kinds of concepts here? Are there cards that are like, are there multiple characters that are scouts, for example, or is Andrea the only one? Are there cards that can be equipped by every scout, or are we keeping cards that are just unique to the individual characters? We've gone back and forth a lot on that, and because we don't, I think, just haven't done enough characters yet. We're kind of keeping it that everyone is unique and special. But it is a entry point to maybe something there. That's a design thing that's been racking us for a while.
Yeah. And it is very interesting about how these games treat that. Like when you have something like with like Monster Train Slay the Spire, each, quote unquote character or faction is a class unto themselves. Like
hmm
their abilities are unique to them. But as you said, like when you start opening up the door for more characters, especially in a game like with games like with deck building design in general, it is a very specific gameplay loop.
hmm
What you're doing on each day and night cycle, that doesn't change. So
Right.
the cards that you have to design have to fit that model. You can't design a character who says, you know what, let's just skip the night cycle. We'll have the
Yeah.
late afternoon cycle instead. We're just changing stuff like that.
Right. Absolutely. And our initially when I was designing the engine for Wastenauts and trying to make sure that the core kind of loop that you're talking about was in place, I desperately tried to put in as many hooks and modifiable parts as possible, knowing like we want
Mhm.
cards to be able to change all of this.
Mhm.
And invariably, as soon as I like finished, Dan had like 10 ideas for cards, and I was like, no, I can't do any of those things. So I the flexibility that cards give you can also sometimes be a curse in that sense. Yeah.
So it gives you insomnia to
Chronic
sleep all.
insomnia and you have to sleep all day. We have one of the new keywords that's kind of fun that we're adding is panic. The monster makes you panic, and you have to like continually stay out and can't return to camp. So there's a little bit of that software. It might be coming closer than you think.
um, and I guess like two other questions. Like I said, I want to ask a little bit more about the art and the UI for the game. So
Sure.
starting with the art, what was kind of like the inspiration? Like obviously there's something like cues from like Borderlands, Mad Max. Like where did the art style for Wastenauts come from?
It came entirely from our illustrator Marina. Like she has guided this from start to finish. We approached her with a vague idea of some kind of wasteland vibe, and Marina actually does a fair amount of wasteland cosplay herself. She goes to like wasteland ball. She will spend like weeks in the desert, like in the Mojave, and just kind of like be out there, and so totally like gets that vibe. She has like when she's at like our booths at PAX or stuff, people think that she's in cosplay from our game, and she's like, no, it's just what I wear. Like this. Like I look like I am from Mad Max. And she has really, really driven that artistic approach. Obviously, we talked about like Borderlands and Mad Max being on the mood board. I think like Kill Bill's on there, Rat Queens, a few other significant kind of comic violence almost would be our kind of focuses there. We've gone a lot back and forth a lot on the art style though. If you see old screenshots of this game, it was originally kind of more painterly, and then it moved more into this specific line art vibe. It's gotten from more realistic to more comic specific. There's a lot of changes that we've done over time until we finally felt like, aha, it all makes sense. And that was recently. That was only about like a year and a half ago that we understood what it was supposed to look like. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of the aesthetics, part of I said one of our core principles is like making do with what you've got. As part of that is everything should feel like it's something from something else.
Mm-hmm.
So all of our monsters, like you should be clearly able to identify, like, hey, that part of that robot is a moped. That part is a toaster. That part, and have moments like that with the robots as well. And the masks for all the robots came entirely from Marina. Like she made one robot with a mask, and we're like, you're gonna have to put them on all of them now. Sorry about it. That's literally how that happened, and we love it. It's really like a nice unifying theme to set our robots apart. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the other question I want to ask regarding like the UI, like
Yeah.
when we were playing this, like the UI felt very complete. At least we had like a few nitpicks in terms of like being able to quick select stuff, things along those
Yeah.
lines. What kind of like work or like what kind of like research did you do to get the UI to Wastenauts to where it's at now?
Yeah, we brought on another amazing team member, Anna Funk. You should see the UI before Anna joined the team. It is atrocious. It is so bad. We had this massive clunky wheel at the top left of the screen that turned constantly, had like 18 parts and kept track of everything. And nobody understood what it was. It took up like a fourth of the screen. We had to constantly explain it. And as soon as Anna joined it, she's like, "What the hell is this? Like, what?" Like, why can't we just like make this a normal UI? And she has done so much work on this game to get it there. So she's the one who brought us to like a more unified bar and like clean up the cards, because even the cards were confusing. The layout didn't make any sense. You couldn't figure out what was on them. It was in really bad shape because none of us are UI experts. But Anna actually was at PlayStation, doing UI UX design specifically, and finding the right people who can just like look at a game and be like, "Oh, here's where you're messing up." Like, it's really the most important to know that kind of stuff. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we ran into UI issues a lot at the beginning, watching people play our game and not understanding how to play. There's still some issues. We still have a lot of cleanup to do, but the stuff that she has touched is
Mm-hmm.
already like fixed, and the stuff that she's moving. And now I'm like, okay, but what about like this one and this one? Because this one's also terrible. And we those are the ones that we did originally, and she hasn't gotten to yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I mean, we could have like a whole like 2 hour discussion on UI design, like
yeah.
that. Like every developer watching this right now, we could probably just bring them all in and rant about UI design for that period
Yes,
of time. And
yes.
it is a lot harder than I think a lot of consumers give credit for in terms of having good UI UX. And thank you,
Reaction. Yeah, we should
like
have.
a slow motion, like the horror washing
Like,
over her face.
what is this? Um, it is. It's and I think more for us, card games are entirely UI. Card
Mm-hmm.
games are nothing but UI. They are, it's not like we have a level designer. We don't need somebody who's going to be shaping terrain. We don't need
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's going to be like building the walls of our 3D levels, or placing platforms at the correct jump distance in our 2D
Mm-hmm.
platformer. There's none of that. It's the level is UI. Everything is UI. And so it's not just a thing that we have to worry about. It is the thing we have to worry about for
Mm-hmm.
the actual layout of the game and how the game flows and where things are situated on the screen. Um, yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
that my CCG is UI of the game. Yes, absolutely. Collectible card game. It's UI of the game.
Yeah.
Um, if you're familiar with the Unity engine, all of our stuff is in the UI side. It's not in the world space. It's in the UI stuff,
Yeah.
and it just happens as a result of that. Yeah.
And then kind of like from there though, then the next challenge is the aesthetics. Because if it's just raw UI, people are
Right.
going to look at it and go again, what the hell is this thing? And then go somewhere else. And
Right.
you have to kind of build, like, as you said, and as Shark said, like the UI is not only the game, but it's also your aesthetics and art as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to ask, like, who came up? Did she come up with the idea, like how, like, when a character attacks, they each have like a custom animation? Like Buster, like has like the boxing glove. I think Andrea has like the little drone that comes out, and so on, like that attacks the enemy.
Yeah. We had those. Originally, our attack was just that the portrait would just like fly over and like leave and then go back. And we had this complicated contraption like to hold the character portraits, and it's
Mhm.
like that's just taking up screen space. And yeah, those kinds of animations were one of maybe I think they were the first animations that we added to the game, to give the characters like a little bit more flavor, to make it
Mhm.
something that felt like they had their own distinct personality there. Um, where they are, how they operate, those have changed like every 3 or 4 months. But the core animation has been in for quite a while. Yeah. But I I think we have, and I've been posting some of the old art or like old screenshots on our Kickstarter updates as to like this is what the game used to look like. It's terrible. We had such huge. The portrait was like this big, and then there was a massive frame around it, and it's like why are we doing this? Why are we taking up so much screen space with frames? Let's just make sure that the characters are front and center. And to that point of like the providing the aesthetic, yeah, they really do set the tone. They set the mood of the game, right? It's a difference between Diablo, just having a red orb and a blue orb, and then having like Gothic statues surrounding them that look like they are off of a cathedral. That difference is huge in a game, and it's a really important aesthetic element to set the entire tone. Yeah,
Definitely. I guess like from when she looked at the UI and kind of like the work that you're doing now on it, for any other developers like watching us live recorded, any like major takeaways, anything that somebody else who's building a UI for their game, or if it doesn't have to be a deck builder or not, like anything like major that you learn as you've like grown and worked on this.
yeah. If it matters, it's got to be front and center. If it like that's just the absolute thing, right? If it is relevant, if that's the important thing, and that's what you want your players to look at, it needs to be in the center of the screen. Players don't see things on the side of the screen. Players don't see things on the top of the screen. They don't see things on the bottom of the screen. If you need them to pay attention to it, it's got to be in the center. So one thing we are constantly running into, where is on the short list for issues, is we've got this vote panel that slides out from the side that asks you to vote on crafting gear, because it's a shared resource to use to craft, and we want to make sure that everyone is on board. We don't want in a pickup group that I'm just going to craft my stuff, I'm going to use all our resources and screw you. So we ask everyone to vote. The vote panel slides out and you vote on the right side of the screen. Nobody sees it. Like, people miss it constantly. And it happens in our playtest too. We're the developers of this game. We play this game several times a week, and we're still like, oh shoot, I didn't see that, sorry about that. It's, if we want somebody to vote on something, we got to make it front and center. So that's one of our things. So if you need the attention of your player, it's got to be right where their eyes are, right in the center of the screen. Yeah.
One thing that we found was like a little bit confusing was when the events come up during an adventure, and it says accept or don't accept, and some of the only option was just to accept. Like we had a little bit of confusion there. Yeah.
We need to we made a change 2 or 3 weeks ago to the game where not everyone could vote, because originally the way that system was set up was everyone could accept or not accept. And people were like, well, wait a second, why is so-and-so getting to decide whether I have to fight something? That's not fair. So we changed that to a situation where only the players who had characters in the current party could actually vote on it, and everyone else just had like a ready button to indicate, because the balance for that then is, if I'm the only person who can vote and I'm a player who doesn't read, I just skip all dialogue, but you're a player who reads everything, then we don't want to skip it for you. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm skipping it for you. So we wanted to make sure that players who read everything could still have a ready button. That's a tough balancing act, especially in a multiplayer game where everyone kind of needs to advance in lockstep in terms of reading dialogue and things like that. So we're still finessing exactly what the rules are there. I think the rules we finally got about 3 weeks ago, and now it's a question of how we communicate them to the player. Yeah.
All right. So I think with that, as a quick time check, we are just over an hour in. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter and kind of future plans, and that will kind of take us to the end. So I would say another 20-30 minutes, I think, at most, should be good if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here.
All right. So with that, let's switch gears for a few minutes, talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter itself. So as we said, it is on right now. There will be a link to it in the recorded version. So the first question I always like to ask developers when they go to Kickstarter: how long have you planned the actual Kickstarter campaign? Like, what you want to do in it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. We started talking about Kickstarter last summer. We started in earnest preparing for it first week of December. So December, January, February, part of March.
Okay.
Yeah. So 3.5 or so months of planning went into it. I think that that's kind of the minimum. It's really hard to do everything that you're going, and even with 3.5 months of prep, we were still like the night before it was going live, we're like, okay, we got to get this, we got to I think there's a lot that has to get done in order to prepare for a Kickstarter, and it is going to consume a lot of dev hours that are not dedicated to making the game or things like that.
Now, one thing that I find interesting is I'm looking at the page for it, and there's always
I
that
should pull it up too.
there's always that debate about stretch goals versus not having them. And I can see that Wastenauts doesn't have it unless that's something you're playing on now too. Okay. So what was the decision not to have them with us?
Yeah. So first off, I should note that the director of Kickstarter, Anya Combs, or not director of all of Kickstarter, director of games for Kickstarter, Anya Combs, is a friend of mine here in New York, and her advice was don't do it. She is squarely on the side of don't do stretch goals until you've actually hit your goal. And if somebody at Kickstarter tells me not to do it, I'm not going to do it. But I also my impression generally when I go to a page that is not yet funded, I thought $30,000 was, for our budget, something that we could reasonably do. I was under no illusions that we were going to raise $30,000 in one day. And so when I go to a page that has their Kickstarter or their stretch goals up on day one, what I see is, wait, how much do you actually need to make this game? Because you're asking for X amount of dollars for the actual pledge. And if you get that, you need to make it. But then I'm seeing on your stretch goals, you need $20,000 to do some kind of basic things that I would expect to be in the game. So that leads me to believe that you don't know what you're doing about your game. You're not serious about it. You don't have a core understanding. There are people who can get away with it. Those people are the ones who know that day one, like they will be funded within 48 hours. If you know, 24, 48 hours, you are going to be funded. There's no question about it. Like you are, some celebrity who made all of our favorite games from childhood, and this is your first indie game, or this is your 20th Kickstarter. You are, in fact, back when like Hairbrain was doing like the Shadowrun Kickstarters, or you are Obsidian doing the Path of Exile, or not, Pillars of Eternity, the other PoE, Pillars of Eternity Kickstarters. You know that it's going to be funded on day one. Cool. Get up your stretch goals. If you're anyone else, don't.
Yeah, and the other point, as you said, is that, and I'm glad you brought up Hairbrain Schemes. I was just about to mention them. I think like their model, I think, has been like my fare for their stretch goals. That they actually group them into various development cycles and say, okay, if we do stretch goals 1 through 4, we're going to push this game back 2 months. If we do stretch goals 5 through 8, then maybe we'll push it back another 6 months. Because as you said, like, if you just have like 27 stretch goals and say, oh, we're not changing the development times, like, how are you fitting in 27 stretch goals and still release the game in a year?
You have to throw more people at it. Like I often, tell people when it comes to game development that like 9 women can't have a baby in a month. It's not possible. There's certain things that just take a certain amount of time. And so if you're saying you're going to add this new feature, there is there's no amount of manpower that is going to do it at the same amount of time. It is going to take longer. Yeah, it's a smart move. It's a really smart move. There's also the problem of sometimes people put up stretch goals without pricing them out. So it's like, oh, okay, it's going to be an additional $3,000 for us to port to Switch. And I'm like, have you asked somebody how much it's going to cost to port to Switch? Have you gotten approval from Nintendo to release this on Switch? Have you, done those kinds of things before you're just making those kinds of promises? Yeah.
And of course, don't forget about rewards and not doing the proper planning with them. We're going to have custom jackets completely embroidered for $20, and we'll ship them to your door for free shipping. And
yep. I did that with my first Kickstarter. It was terrible. The top tier that I had was a physical box set of Vidar. That was the top tier reward, and we had, I want to say, about 50 or 60 people back at that tier. And then I was like, okay, time to go get this box set made. And I could not find anyone who would do. I found finally one person. Most people would not do it for less than 500 units. They were like, you're going to get 500 box sets. That's the absolute minimum we can do. Like, but I only have 60 backers that want this.
Yep.
And I finally found one that would do it for 100. So the short story is that I still have 30 box sets of this game sitting in my closet. They take up a lot of space. And it's it's something that you have to pay attention to. So this time for our physical rewards, we specifically went and looked at what we could do. We have an artist shop on Threadless, and Threadless will allow us to do individualized orders one at a time. So if we only need 2 t-shirts or something like that, we can do 2 t-shirts. And we priced out their base price and all that kind of stuff, and then we were able to go from there. We were smarter about it this time. Yep.
And again, it kind of like leads back into our discussion about the design as well, that there's a lot you need to understand about this before you can go in and make a proper game. And again, I have seen plenty of developers, sadly, who've, death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to issues of Kickstarter and not properly scoping this out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that, I've heard a lot of people talk about how every time they come back to Kickstarter, they actually scale it down and down and down and down. This is only my second one, but already I have like fewer reward tiers. I have fewer, I'm throwing fewer things at people because I think it's really kind of just that focus, like get down to the game and get down to things that people are actually going to want. What's the point of having $1,000, $2,000 tier on your Kickstarter? Like, who besides your parents are going to be backing that at that tier? And do they really want do your parents want the rewards at $2,000, or are they just doing it to try to send you some money and make your project succeed? So we capped it this time at a pretty low reward tier, and I think that was smart because we're getting a lot of backers at that tier, which is really cool for us. And it's something that I think it takes a lot of editing and also. The smartest thing that we did when it came to rewards this time was we just asked our community. And, obviously if you're going into Kickstarter, you've got your backers lined up. You have to. You can't go into Kickstarter expecting, I'm going to put it on Kickstarter, it's going to fund. That's not a thing anymore. Kickstarter says that roughly 30% of your backers will come, or 30% of your funding will come from people who discover it on the website. That means 70% of it has to come from people you brought. And so those 70% of people should be lined up, and you could just go and ask them. You could say, hey, what do you want for rewards? So we posted in our Discord. We said, what kind of rewards do you guys like? And one of the ideas that we had in our draft reward tiers was a lot of boosts for things. Like when it came out, it's well, you'll automatically unlock, level 2, and we'll give you 1,000 crowns and all this kind of stuff. And no one wanted that. Not one person in our community was this is a good, because everyone's I want to play the whole game. I want to start from scratch and I want to do the whole thing. And we're cool, that's out. At the same time, there was way more of an emphasis on in-game cosmetics that people wanted than we were planning for. So the week before Kickstarter launch, we're cool, what other in-game cosmetics can we get up and running? And just asking people, literally just asking people what they want is the best way to figure out what this should be.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. And again, if they're your fans, they're the ones who are going to be supporting you. They kind of know what they want out of your game.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So that's really the best way to approach that kind of thing. And then go out and price them and, make sense and make sure it all makes sense. But yeah, there for us, there was rarely any kind of moment where there was a secret with our backers. We wanted to make sure, the week before we're here's the hoodie, here's the bag, here are the reward tiers, all that kinds of things, so that they knew and could check us. And if the response was timid or tepid and oh, okay, then we're oh, maybe we don't do that, or maybe we scratch that or put it a lower tier. And if the response is oh my god, this is amazing, then we know how to focus that. And okay, let's make sure there's an image of it in the Kickstarter page. Let's make sure it's bolded, kinds of things. Yeah.
In terms of marketing, what kind of marketing did you and the other team do in terms of getting the word out for Wastenauts?
Yeah, I don't know. Everything and anything that we can kind of figure out. Admittedly, most of our community building has been done at conventions, which, surprise, there were none in 2020.
Yeah.
It's been really hard for us to make that pivot. Actually, a lot of our community, like core members from our Discord, found us at PAX or at local events or DreamHack or similar things like that. And replacing that, we haven't quite done yet. We really haven't. So for marketing, what we've done is we have been doing a lot of content creator outreach recently. We have been going through, and this has been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, where we just go into Twitch, we go onto YouTube, we go to find people who are playing similar games, who are have a little bit of at least of a following. We take a look. And we're like, oh, this person seems cool. This person seems like they'd be interested, and we email them directly. We don't have a list. We don't have like a list of 10,000 Twitch streamers that we just like mail merge or send a campaign. We don't have that. It's been a lot of individual one-off, like trying to find the right people to do it, because some advice that I heard that was very important is you can do things on social media. You can do things like try to tweet things out and like get like the great GIF and get put things on Facebook and blah blah blah. But that is advertising on your storefront. That is people who are already following you. That is people who are there paying attention to you. And I can't just open a restaurant and be like, okay, cool, people are going to come to me. That's my Twitter page, right? My storefront is my Twitter page. That's not good enough. You have to go find where your customers are and be there as opposed to be where you are. And so far in this COVID situation, the only place that we know where they are places, with other content creators like Twitch, like YouTube, other platforms. And that's where we're just right now focusing our efforts on. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is tough. And as we were saying at the start, like you're based out in New York, I'm in New Jersey, so it's always going to talk to another East Coaster. But like the East Coast is unfortunately still not like I think predominantly known for game development, especially not as much as the West Coast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it is, I think, again, like somebody who's on YouTube knows that how hard it can be to find and reach out to an audience.
Yeah, it's we have some. So New York has some pretty strong communities. We have some good anchors. Playcrafting is one, which is a community of different devs, and they do various events and conventions. This all in the before times. NYU is a great resource because the NYU Game Center is a great hub for game development. I just until recently used to teach game design up at Ostos in the Bronx. So there are good educational institutions here. Bloomfield out in New Jersey also has a strong games program. We count them as ours when we need to. So there's a good presence here, but it's not known for game development by any stretch. It's not like we have kind of major events or anything. The two biggest that we that were in play were MagFest down in DC, and then PAX East up in Boston. And fortunately, both are on Amtrak, so it's very easy for me to just go 4 hours in either direction. But it's not like we have just constant networking events or things like that. Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Anything else regarding the Kickstarter that we haven't touched on yet?
Trying to think if there's any. Kickstarter is a very interesting time to do some experimentation. And the other thing is that so with Kickstarter, the common trend is that you get a bunch of backers the first 3 days, and then it kind of just slowly grows, and then the last 2 days, right? And that loop is almost for every single Kickstarter project in existence. Games are not. And so what you do during that kind of lull period where you're only getting slow growth is going to make or break it essentially. And so we're trying just pretty much anything that we can think of, and we're throwing it against the wall. So this Sunday, for example, we're going to do a play with the devs where we're just going to be online all day, playing with people during the alpha. and see if that like encourages people to bring their friends and things like that. We're looking at doing some kinds of social goals, so some things like where the community can get together to blast this out on social media, and if certain metrics are hit, then new rewards are unlocked. And we're looking at releasing new content during the Kickstarter as well to see if that can keep people engaged, because we already have a few people who are at level cap, and I'm like, uh-oh. Like I see people, I'm like, you guys have been playing this like 24 hours a day since the Kickstarter launched. It's just an alpha build, guys. Like it's not the whole game yet.
Stop. On the positive side, means they must really like the game.
It is. It's really great to see until they're just like, okay, I finished it. What's next? And I'm like, no.
Where's the rest of your game? It should be done by now.
But we're gonna try to put out some additional content during this time as well. And so that kind of time is interesting time for experimentation to see like what are your plans to make it through that lull, to keep the hype train going, to keep like marching the war drums or banging on the war drums. Yeah.
All right, so I think with that, I am about out of questions. If anyone has any last-minute questions for Dean about Wastenauts, the Kickstarter, the design, please get them in. This will be officially last call. Because other than that, I think I just have a few kind of like end-of-stream wrap-up questions for you, and then we can say goodnight.
Cool.
So, I guess the first one, I'm sure something a lot of people are wondering. If Wastenauts does make its Kickstarter, what plans do you have for, I guess, release? Like whether it's early access, 1.0, or anywhere in between?
Yeah, I think that this game is prime for early access, not just because of the nature of the game, but also because of our design approach and our design philosophy of iteration. It's really helpful to get eyes on it to say, oh, this doesn't make sense. This does make sense. We need to patch this kind of hole missing in our design. Let's come up with systems that can do that. I think it's just a smart move all the way around. So almost certainly we are going to be looking at early access. Don't hold me to it when I decide next year that it doesn't make sense for us anymore. But that is generally what we're looking at right now. In terms of additional releases besides on Steam, I would love to see this on mobile. The problem is that I don't know the first thing about mobile releases. I'm not the person to do it. It's just not my expertise at all. So it would be something that we would be looking to work with other people and go from there. And then I do know more about console. The issue with console releases, the first hurdle we're going to hit is controller input. This game has been entirely built assuming click and drag, and everything is click and drag. And so getting us to a place where the UI and UX makes a lot of good sense and is intuitive using a controller, if I can get there, then I will start to consider console releases.
One thing that I saw on your Kickstarter was I think it was like one of your higher goals about, or higher rewards about, lifetime expansions or lifetime, post-release support. Now, obviously, we're at the start of a Kickstarter for a game, so we can't exactly be talking about, what are you going to be doing 10 years from now? But in terms of kind of like thinking along those lines, in terms of expansions or where you would like to see the game grow, what are your kind of thoughts on like what you would like to see with Wastenauts?
Yeah, so obviously, there's always the opportunity for new systems, and that's where both Dan and I excel as designers, is on systems design specifically. So adding additional things like zone modifier cars, or adding new concepts to the game that kind of change how you're playing it and are progressing, and all those kinds of things are always where our hearts are. To do that for additional zones. So, we're planning to have 5 zones at launch. We already have the next 5 zones very roughly sketched out in our head for like the first expansion of like, here's where we want them to take place and what the kind of core mechanics would be. And then obviously new characters that would go with it as well. Like if we could do, another like 2 zones and a character for each expansion, that would just be really nice. That would be like a nice set to get added to the game for additional progression.
And like this is something I was talking with Shark about, since he's working on a deck builder of his own. Like, in terms of like the pipeline for new
Hmm.
expansions, like
Hmm.
if everything goes accordingly, the game succeeds on Kickstarter, and you're able to work on expansions. What kind of like timetable are you thinking about in terms of getting new expansions out to the people?
Yeah. It depends. It really depends on whether or not we feel we need to go. There's two different paths for this.
Mm-hmm.
The first I would say is more the like Hearthstone model where it's like every 3 to 4 months, like there is another,
Mm-hmm.
expansion that's going to come out and we're going to crank this stuff out. We've made sure, actually we did a huge update on our Kickstarter yesterday about it, of all the things that we're doing for like how to create a card so that it's like super quick and seamless. The hardest part is the art. Like the rest of the like card logic should come together in like a few hours, kind of thing. The other path to go for it, especially and maybe during early access versus launch, these kinds of things differ, is the Slay the Spire path, where they were they putting out every week or every 2 weeks? It might have been every week they were putting out a patch, at least some kind of patch during early access.
Oh yeah, like for Slay the Spire, I remember it was like every
Yeah,
week, every 2 weeks. Here's a new update, and then oh
yeah.
shit, a bug fixes and quality of life.
It was just constant, right? So as opposed to like, these bigger drops like every 3 months of like, here's a bunch of new content, it was slower dribs and drabs, or it was faster, but it was less content each time. That I think, especially for early access, made a lot of sense for them. And we may do one for early access, one for launch. We may do just one the whole time or the other. We may blend the two. I don't really know in terms of how we're going to approach it. I think it makes the most sense to look at like where our community is at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Speaking about community, I think that's another very interesting point about anything multiplayer related is making sure you have a community of people because like especially with games that are cooperative or competitive based, and sadly we've seen this plenty of times over that game is launched, there's gonna be like 20, 30 people playing, you can't find a game is dead within like four
yeah,
days
yeah.
I guess how are you engaging the community, or how is the community for Wastenauts right now?
Yeah. So the first thing I think is that's really important is like if you're an indie that's making a multiplayer game, it has to be able to play single player. It has to be able to play single player because in all likelihood, like I mean, 18 months is like a really nice lifespan for your game. And after, like it's realistically you're going to hit some server death like at launch and it's going to be a problem. So you need to have some kind of way to engage with the game single player, and it needs to be as good. So that's been a really important design focus for us. We never want to be in a situation where you can't play Wastenauts without or because there aren't other people online. In terms of engaging with our community, we've tried to filter most of them to Discord. That's kind of sometimes you can have the pressure to be in too many places.
Mm-hmm.
You can and as a small team, it's difficult to keep up a Discord, a Twitter, a Facebook, an IndieDB page, a Game Dealt page, a itch page, a da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so making sure that your community knows where to find you, and for us, it's Discord, is has been really good. Uh, and we try to we show things that we're working on. I do dev streams on Twitch where I for just a few hours, like on a Monday, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
come look at what I'm working on. Like it's completely spoilery. You're gonna see everything that is coming up in the next things because it's what I'm working on. But if that's like your jam, then come check it out. We'll hang out.
Mm-hmm.
um we have actually um a the I think it was Gamepedia originally, but they were just bought out by Fandom. Set up our official wiki for us, and that's been another like effort to kind of focus our community efforts. So like, hey, did you have fun on the game? You um, uh, have learned specific strategies. You unlock specific cards. There are millions of pages that need to get updated on this wiki, like and created. So
Mm-hmm.
while we're in between alphas or something like that, here's a good place for you to kind of share some knowledge and stuff like that and talk about the game. So there are tools where you can kind of galvanize your community a little bit in particular directions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we finally have like a handful of people like organically posting memes in our chat. So I'm sure you saw when you're playing, a lot of our card art is still just as temp art, that temp art has kind of just organically become a meme in our community, so much so that it's become now like an emote that we can use on Twitch and all this kind of stuff. We made a dice skin based on it. It was our first dice skin for the game. And so empowering, rather than like trying to force it, I'm not somebody who can like come up with that kind of creative stuff and be like, here's a new thing I know it's going to go viral. But if something seems to be taking off and like somebody's making a joke and other people are joining in, empower that and find out ways for them to continue to engage and feel like they're in on the joke. Yeah.
You're just like giving my audience like free ammunition to make more memes about me, I think.
It's important, and it's it's something that can be taken and you can run with it and make your community feel like they are in fact part of a community. They are, but they need to feel that too. Yeah.
All right. So with that, I guess to wrap things up, I guess for one thing, any other developers or groups in the New York area you'd like to give a shout out to before we let you go?
Oh boy, well I saw Blair at the top of chat. I don't know if he's still here, but Blair Pyle from Fat Games is doing some really cool RPG work right now, and has been releasing some fun demos. Anybody else in the New York area? God, there's so many. Francisco, who operates under Grunoslav Games.
Oh yeah, I spoke with
a lot
him.
of adventure. Yeah, he's fantastic. Great adventure point and click games. He's got another one coming up called Rosewater. I don't know if he has a release date for it yet, but I feel like it's soon. He's been making a lot of progress on it. Pay attention to Sam Eng. Sam makes the most gorgeous stuff in Unity that you've ever seen in your entire life. He released a game that was Zarvox, I want to say it was called, but it was like blocks that were like shooting each other. And it was like every post-processing effect that has existed in Unity, he knows how to do. And he's releasing a new game that is like you are a skateboarder that is like skating to hell. And it looks just so pretty, so pretty. And then, oh boy, there's so many, and I'm gonna forget so many of them. I feel like that's a roundup of people, but I apologize if I'm forgetting people that you should be paying attention to. Another shout out as to Mike Harris. Mike has been working on a game called Run and Gun, which is a really cool parkour shooter as well. I'm gonna like post in my Discord like here are a bunch of New York developers that you need to go follow because there's just a ton. Computer Lunch, I've actually done some production work for them. They have an idle game. Idle games are awesome. Idle games are wild. Idle games are crazy to balance and keep up with the community. And they have an idle game called Cell to Singularity, which is about like you start at an individual cell and it grows all the way up to like past humanity.
As somebody who really does love idle games as well, what was the name of that one? I'll add it to my...
Cell to Singularity. So it's cell, like CELL, like an individual cell. And then you try to evolve past humanity to like, meta humanity and all this kind of stuff. And you're evolving the entire tree of life. All these different kinds of things. And it's a lot of fun. When I was doing work with them, it was a completely different world for me. I'm normally not experienced with free-to-play games. I'm not experienced with things that are considered like a secondary form of entertainment. Yeah.
Oh, I think I saw. Is this on mobile too? Because I think I may have played it.
Yeah, it's primarily mobile. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, they are working on a PC version, it looks like, too.
Yes. And boy, there's just so many. Jonah has, I think his game, Kung Fu Kickball, is coming out soon, which is like almost like what if Smash Brothers was a kickball game. There's a lot of good games being made here. It's just that we don't have like the big AAAs to anchor us, so nobody cares about us.
Unfortunately, I can certainly attest to that too.
Yeah.
From one of the comments, do you have a link to your Discord and Twitch channel?
I do. I do. Let me grab those.
If you can post that in to the message to me, because I know YouTube can be a little weird about links if they're not from.
Okay, cool. I will. So let me give you I'll put it in Discord, but it'll be the Discord link.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Twitch is easy because it's Raspberry Games. There we go. Yep.
Okay, let me put that in the chat. Hopefully YouTube will allow. They're very iffy sometimes when it comes to links.
Yeah. If not, you can go to the Kickstarter page has a link to our Discord. So that's a pretty straightforward way to get to us as well.
Yep. And I'll include those.
Literally, game. There's a link.
I'll make sure to include those in the record version as well for people watching us there. Other than that, I guess I know it feels like we just started. It's almost 2 hours. Anything else you would like to say about Wastenauts? Like anything that we somehow missed? Anything we didn't cover?
No, I think what our big push right now is to have people play the alpha, like the entire. It's not just like a level. There's like easily like 20 hours of content in there already for people to play, and that's what we want people to do, because I think that they're going to end up getting hooked and enjoying it, and want to back us and see the game succeed. So if you're at all interested in the game, that's the easiest way to figure out more about it and see and explore it, because it's not like there's any limits on it. It's what we have so far.
All right. I guess then my final question for you then for tonight, Dean. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans watching to take us out for tonight?
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining us for tonight, but then also, or if you're watching on video, and for the support, because it's especially at an indie level, it is only the community that empowers us to be able to make what we're making. It's not it's a fundamentally different beast than AAA games. We rely entirely on our community, our patrons, our fans, to be able to make cool, weird, maybe not commercially successful things. And so it is owed entirely to them. So thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So with that, I will let you go for tonight. Again, thank you so much for coming on, and best of luck with the Kickstarter.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who popped up in chat and talked with us tonight.
Mm-hmm. And thank you to everybody watching this live or recorded. Be sure to check out the game. Again, there'll be links to everything in the description in the recorded version. And Dean, if you are free in the future, hopefully, ideally after a successful Kickstarter to come back on, definitely get in touch, and we can certainly set something back up.
Definitely. We'll do it again when all of these design things have changed, after we have successfully funded and we're about to launch.
All right. So thank you again for everybody watching. If you are a developer working on an upcoming game or just want to talk design and would like to come on, please get in touch. We are always looking for a guest. And you'd like me to take a look at your game for a future stream or weekly indie game store page review show, please get in touch. We're always looking for submissions for that. I will be back later tonight for our regular game stream. Be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, as well as my upcoming books on design. I have my roguelike book coming out in about 2 weeks at the time of this recording. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we in the art and science of games. Have a great weekend, everybody, and see you next time. Take care.